At the end of 2020, speedrunning was turned on its head when Japanese runners found a way to break Dragon Quest III using a hotplate to generate glitches. Since then, we've seen more fantastic and incredible tricks, from Ocarina of Time breaking Paper Mario to Battle for Bikini Bottom using gunked up CDs to perform glitches more consistently. But the desire to break Dragon Quest never stopped, with runners finding an even more incredible and slightly less dangerous method of beating the game using unique exploits that have the current record under 10 seconds. By using other games, they're able to set up an ace payload that will warp them to the credits, and that's what we're looking at today, the history of how runners broke Dragon Quest III in one of the most unique ways possible. Before we get going, the glitches talked about have a chance of success tied to one number, and that's the number of people subscribed who watch this video. So if you want to see the runners have a higher chance of success, please click that subscribe button. Since this is an ACE glitch, here's an overview of what ACE is and how it works. ACE stands for Arbitrary Code Execution, which is exactly as it sounds. It allows you to execute code that otherwise shouldn't be executed in the game. Speedrunners normally use ACE to perform a credits warp, and it requires two things: the ability to write code in the game, and a way to execute that code once it's written. You do need to have some technical knowledge to be able to research and prove out this type of glitch, and luckily, Pirohiko was on the case from the beginning. A prolific tasser and speedrunner in the Japanese scene, Pirohiko had the technical knowledge to work on an ACE glitch, as he was the one that theorized and proved out the Hotplate Glitch back in 2020. Deciding you want to do ACE in a game doesn't mean it's possible, however, as you normally need a glitch to get the investigation started. But luckily for Pirohiko, there was an exploit that had been known about in Japan for over 30 years. You may have heard of Minus World, a level in Super Mario Bros. That you can enter by accessing the 1-2 pipe using a wall glitch. It's an endless water level with the ID -1, hence the name Minus World. But what if I told you there were even more of these glitched levels, and that runners in Japan had known about them since the 80s? In normal gameplay, this collection of glitched levels isn't accessible to you. It requires some outside of the NES thinking to get Mario into them. If you start a game of SMB and then remove the cartridge with the power still on, you can then insert the tennis game into the Famicom. Once you've played a few rounds on tennis, you can then remove the cartridge while the power is still on and put SMB back in. Then by holding A+ start on the title screen, something fantastic happens. Depending on what you did in tennis, you'll be transported to a different glitched level of the game, and your first thought is probably, what's going on? So let's have a look. The Famicom has RAM built into the system, which games use to run when they're booted up, with some games having additional RAM on the cartridge so they can include more content, and in some cases, the cartridge RAM is battery backed so that save files can be created. Early games, and those that are smaller in scope, have no RAM on the cartridge. They only contain a ROM that runs entirely on the RAM in the Famicom, which did have some drawbacks. The SMB and tennis glitch being one of them. Since RAM on the console was being utilized for both games, this meant that when you pulled out tennis and put SMB back in with the power running, the RAM from tennis wouldn't have decayed, so when SMB boots up, it has a jumbled mess of data already in the console's RAM, which just happened to create semi-playable levels. To address this potential hardware vulnerability, Nintendo introduced the Checking Integrated Circuit, or CIC chip, starting in 1985. The CIC had a few functions, the most important to this glitch being the algorithm that runs when a game is launched at power on. It served as a verification for if the game was legit or not, which meant Nintendo could push unlicensed third-party games off of their console. The reason it affects the glitch worlds in Mario is because the security algorithm ran at power on, meaning if you swap cartridges with the system running, the game would never boot properly, because the algorithm would never run on the game you just inserted. This meant that North American versions of the NES wouldn't have access to the glitch worlds since they didn't release until after the CIC was implemented, but the information to do this glitch would make it here eventually. In an article posted to Twin Galaxies by Rich Booth, he outlines how this glitch is possible on a later release of the NES that didn't have the CIC chip. and a few videos popped up trying this out around 2012. Since Pirohiko knew Ace was possible on the Famicom by switching cartridges, he decided to try and do a credits warp back in 2018 using Dr. Mario and Dragon Quest III. He quickly found that if you start with Dr. Mario, swap to DQ3, and then swap back to Dr. Mario, the game will perform a credits warp in just under a minute, landing you on the final screen with some interesting visuals. After the entire Hotplate fiasco, which if you don't know about, you can check out my video on it here, Pirohiko had an idea across his mind. If I can do a credits warp in Dr. Mario using Dragon Quest, can I do a credits warp in Dragon Quest using Dr. Mario? He got to work investigating his theory and quickly figured out one thing. Dragon Quest III is vastly more complex than Dr. Mario, and it was going to take some effort to perform an Ace credits warp. To help unravel the game's code, he created a tool that allowed him to look at the RAM and saw that lots of flags and conditions are tracked on the console side of the RAM and not in the cartridge, except for the code that triggered the endgame text. This meant a straight-up Ace payload in console RAM wasn't going to do the trick, so he came up with the following solution. He would use the swap method to create a bugged item, and then using some RAM manipulation with that item, he would create a payload that executed when the item was used, causing the endgame text to trigger. That was a lot to take in, so let's start at the beginning, the cartridge swaps. This type of glitch uses the name Stop and Swap, which it gets from the abandoned mechanic in Banjo-Kazooie that would unlock abilities in the sequel game based on what you did in the first, by swapping the cartridges before the RAM decayed. Since he knew that this was possible on the NES because of the glitched worlds in Mario Bros. And the Dr. Mario end screen he pulled off earlier, he began searching for games that could do the same in Dragon Quest III. Since it's an RPG, the task was a bit more complicated, and it involved using 3 other games, Dr. Mario, Kirby, and Final Fantasy. The setup starts with Dragon Quest, as he needs to reach the king so he can save. This is very important because the king's save takes data from the console's RAM and merges it to the RAM on the cartridge. During the save, he will pull the cart out at a certain point. I'll explain why in just a sec, because now it's time to stop and swap. After pulling out Dragon Quest, he puts in Dr. Mario, but it's only in for a second before being pulled out for Kirby, with these quick switches serving to do more RAM manipulation. Kirby is then pulled out and Dr. Mario placed back in, except this time, the menu cursor is broken thanks to the values left in RAM by Kirby, which allows him to set up more values in RAM using the broken cursor. Once the RAM is set up, it's back to Dragon Quest, and I'd like to remind you that the swaps are all done without turning off the power to the console. When you enter the game now, you'll notice that the text is jumbled up and the party is max level. This is the case for 2 reasons. The payload you set up in RAM is using the same glitch that the Hotplate was making use of, something Pirohiko calls the power off glitch. When you yank Dragon Quest out while saving, you corrupt the data in such a way that it will remain when you restart the game. This is because of a security vulnerability in another chip in the early NES cartridges, different from the CIC chip. It just so happens that the Hotplate made getting favorable states while exploiting this glitch a lot more consistent, which is why you see a max level character with access to all of the spells, including being able to warp to the end of the game. With the Hotplate method, they would warp to the end of the game and kill the final boss, but now with the values he just set up in the console's RAM with the other cartridges, he is able to alter specific values in memory. These RAM values are tied to the first and second character's magic point stat, which is great for our purposes because we will use these values to help jump the game's execution to controller inputs, which will let us press buttons to execute our Ace payload and trigger the end text. At this point, we have almost all of the tools to trigger the endgame text, which has been defined as the endpoint of the run. There's just one issue. The game has a built-in security check, and if we try to finish executing everything we've just set up, our file will get checked by the error detection, and all of the data will be deleted. Luckily, there is one more game we have left to swap to, Final Fantasy. After making sure the character's MP values are correct, we save the game and do the power off glitch again before swapping the Final Fantasy cartridge in. We only take a few steps in the game before switching back, because Final Fantasy sets up something that will allow us to bypass the error detection. Editing the RAM just a bit further, it sets our character level to 0, which for some reason will allow the mess of code we've set in the RAM to get past the error detection. It also does one other thing. It gives us access to a glitched item. Glitched items have been known about in this game for a while. In fact, the Any% run makes great use of them, selling them off for very high amounts of gold. The reason these glitched items are in the game is because the item table has a possible 128 slots, but only uses 125 of them. So the final 3 are glitched, and for technical reasons will do very strange things if you can get them into your inventory and then try to use them. For our purposes, the glitched item we receive will be used to break the text table in the game, which will allow us to move items around our inventory in such a way that they are editing the RAM further. It turns out that the data we are editing with the menu is located in memory to be ran from file 3, and we're currently on file 1, which is a problem if we want to execute it, since file 3 hasn't even been started. Luckily, the error detection that is bypassed with the level 0 character also gets us out of this problem, since for whatever reason, if we try to copy the save data from file 1 to file 3 while in this state, it overwrites the data on file 3 without messing up the code we've set up to perform the endgame trigger. Once you copy the file, there's one final action to take. All of the data we edited to this point has arranged the RAM in such a way that if we use a glitched item now, it will trigger the endgame text. There's just one problem. We have no way of using the glitched item currently. But if you recall, I mentioned that the player's MP values would help us jump the game's program execution to controller inputs, and that's exactly what we're going to do. By using a specific sequence of button presses, we can use the glitched item. If it's done correctly, you will be reset to the title screen, and once you enter file 3, you'll see trumpeters appear in the throne room, followed by the endgame text appearing on the screen. Using this method, they were able to beat the game in under 7 minutes, which is 8 minutes faster than the method involving the Hotplate, but a refined setup was found for this route that would push the time even lower. By running a second NES, you can set up the RAM with Dr. Mario and Kirby while you mash text in the opening of Dragon Quest. And since we're saving RAM to the Dragon Quest cart with the power off glitch, we're able to swap it to the other console without losing any data. Using the double console method works for every swap, so you can set up the Final Fantasy swap while mashing more text in Dragon Quest. It cuts out a lot of setup as you're executing the manipulations simultaneously. With the double console method, Hitshee was able to pull off a run in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and as he approached the sub 4 minute time, something fantastic would happen. It was discovered that you could forego all of the cart swapping and inventory editing if you shorted one of the pins in the cartridge itself. The explanation is beyond anything I understand, but it has something to do with causing electrical interference to the memory management controller chip in the cartridge. With this chip shorted, it allows the game to trigger the endgame text before you leave the house in the opening sequence, in about 30 seconds. If that wasn't insane enough, further modification of that chip allowed the end text to be triggered while you're still on the file select screen, with the current Anything Goes record clocking in at just under 10 seconds. I'd like to take some time to discuss the debate around these methods of beating the game and where they belong in speedrunning. Some people argue that this type of competition violates the spirit of what a speedrun is, since you're no longer playing the game, but modifying hardware and pieces of code to achieve results. Instead of improving skills to master the game, it becomes an arms race of modifying hardware and code, invalidating all of the hard work previous runners took to learn the game and its mechanics. The other side of the argument believes that this is no different than allowing glitches that skip entire sections of game, such as wrong warps and boss skips. If those tricks are legal, why shouldn't these ace credit warps or hardware manipulations be included, as they achieve the same goal, just on a higher scale? If you look at some popular leaderboards, communities have made some different decisions when ace or a hardware modification is found that allows for faster completion time. When Battle for Bikini Bottom discovered that smudging your disc while playing makes some glitches more consistent, they ruled to allow it in any percent. On the other hand, when an ace credits warp was found in Super Mario World, the community opted to create a new leaderboard for it, leaving the classic any percent route untouched, with only glitches that affect gameplay being legal. Other communities, such as Ocarina of Time, have allowed code manipulation glitches in their any percent categories, although in OOT's case, they created a category for people that wanted to continue running the previous route without having to compete with the controversial glitches. So opinions are divided on this, to say the least, and I'm curious as to what you think, so let me know down below. As far as Dragon Quest III goes, I think all of this hardware manipulation is really cool, and the fact that it's being tracked in an anything goes category is fine by me, and should settle any issues as it doesn't affect established leaderboards. This has been one of the craziest glitches that I've ever seen in speedrunning. The amount of technical knowledge that was combined with an understanding of the hardware is nothing short of incredible. This video wouldn't have been possible without the research and theory craft by Pirohiko, or the RTA execution of the routes he came up with by Hitshee. So go give them a follow, as they constantly post incredible feats in the name of beating games fast. Finally, I'd like to add that I'm very close to making videos as my full-time job, so if you would consider sharing this video or subscribing here or to my Patreon, it would be greatly appreciated, as I'd be able to generate more content for everyone to watch. And if you want daily updates, be sure to follow on Twitter or join the Discord. Thanks for watching.